Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Keeping It Social. My name is Chris Salas. I am Associate Professor of Social Work here at El Paso Community College. Now, quick reminder, our show aims to bring to light and awareness of various issues and topics that are relevant to our community. Things that sometimes are not easy to talk about and some that honestly need to be brought up. At the end of the day, all we ask is just keep it social, right? Today, we have with us Laura Marquez, part of PDN Children's Development Center, or PDN Children's. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, glad to have you. So let's start off, obviously, with just a quick introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am a born and raised El Pasoan. I've been here all my life. I am a very proud graduate of UTEP. And Chris knows because we're both from the social work program at UTEP. I got my bachelor's at UTEP, my bachelor's in social work, and also my master's in social work. I'm a mom. I have 3 kiddos. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. It's pretty much everything that encompasses who I am, and a very proud community servant here in our community.
Definitely, yeah, and I think that's something that that echoes from the people that we've had in the show. Is these are everyone who has come through and sat at this table or in some configuration thereof is not only has roots in the city, but is a proud servant, right? They provide some sort of service, some sort of help to our community. So again, you are here and you work for PDN Children's. Tell us a little bit more about that agency.
PDN Children's has been in this community for now over 75 years. We celebrated our 75th anniversary last year. Our mission is to serve children with disabilities or special needs, and we do that through various therapeutic programs, educational programming, social service connecting, and all of it is to support the child, but also support their family so that they can reach their greatest potential. And you know, we do that through 6 major programs. I myself have been with PDN. I started there as a volunteer in 2016. I knew that I wanted to serve children with disabilities and their families, so I did a quick Google search of the agencies that serve children in El Paso. PDN was first on the list, and I said, I need to be there. and I never looked back. So I became a volunteer in 2016. I did my Bachelor's of Social Work internship in 2017. I did my Master's of Social Work internship in 2018 to 19. And then from there, I was able to get part-time positions working in a program that taught parents about their child's special education rights. And it was a very fulfilling job to give families information that they didn't have before and see their eyes just open wide and their minds be open to what is available for them. Right. And I did that for a while, about a year, until I was finally able to transition to full-time employee, being a full-time employee there. And now, a couple of years later, I'm a program supervisor for one of the newest programs that we have called Help Me Grow. Excellent.
So let's set up everything for everybody. We talk about children's disabilities, or even just the word disability as a whole, right? And I feel that sometimes people don't really understand what that is, or sometimes they conceptualize it as just one thing, right? We think of disability sometimes simply as a physical disability, a limitation, right? Either a sensory, visual impairment, deaf or hard of hearing, issues with ambulation or ambulatory problems, someone that has issues walking and transporting themselves from one place to another. But it goes beyond that, right? So tell us a little bit more about, at least in the population you work with in children, what is children's disabilities? What does that look like?
So for a child that has a disability, in the disability services area, and in the clinical aspect, disabilities are categorized as developmental disabilities. And so those are, for a child, that's a disability that either they're born with, or maybe it's acquired during the period of development. And it's classified as up to age 22. And why 22? Because there's disability that is neurodevelopmental related, and that has to do with the brain. And we all know now with a lot of science and research that the brain does not finish fully developing until someone is about 22, 24 years of age. So that's kind of where that range of developmental disability falls, and can reach up until 22. A lot of the developmental disabilities that most of us that are aware of that have kind of the most not only just prevalence, but that most of the awareness is around. And for our population, we serve a lot of kiddos that have autism. And ADHD is another neurodevelopmental related disability. And some of the most common ones are intellectual disability, cerebral palsy. Those are the ones that we see more
Down
commonly,
syndrome.
and Down syndrome, yes. And so there's quite a few, and then there's some disabilities that are acquired. So when I used to work with kiddos in the classroom setting, there were, I worked with kiddos that had a traumatic brain injury as birth, and that resulted in a physical disability or a learning or cognitive related disability. So it ranges, but really at the end of the day, from the clinical aspect, that disability highly impacts the child's daily living to where they need some form of assistance. It could be low assistance, moderate, or high assistance.
Gotcha. So when you're talking about the work that PDN Children's does, do you guys focus more on that, on the neurodevelopmental disorders, disabilities, more than on sensory, or is it a combination of both? Can they coincide, or could there be a comorbidity? What does that look like?
For our agency, we're very proud on the fact that we serve all children, any disability. And so in starting from our early childhood intervention program, which serves children 0 to 3, we see a lot of kiddos from birth, they were born with a disability. They come into our program to receive early intervention, and all of that is just therapeutic supports to help them. So speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, even, medical just guidance to help them, have their medical needs met. And all of that is to just help the child thrive with their disability, with their existence in the presence of a disability. Then from ECI, we have programs like mine, Help Me Grow, which is more about helping families navigate local resources to get them connected. What we see a lot is sometimes families, when they finally get a diagnosis or they get engaged in a system, it's sometimes maybe after 3 years of age or 4 years of age. And so our goal is to just do outreach and get in front of families as early as possible so that we can get them connected to services. Our agency, again, like I mentioned, we serve all disabilities, but then we do see right now, I will say, like our agency, predominantly a lot of the kiddos that are in our 3 and older programs, they have a diagnosis of autism, and that is very much due to, I would say, our ABA program, Applied Behavior Analysis, which is an intervention that is applied a lot for kiddos who have autism. And in that, we also have our pediatric therapy department, which provides speech therapy services and occupational therapy, also feeding. So for a lot of kiddos, whether they have autism or not, a lot of kiddos that have a disability, sometimes there's sensory issues related to eating, which could impact their health, their actual health and development. And so our work, what we do in the feeding department, feeding program, is just to help them get familiar with food, get comfortable with it, eating and trying new things, so that they can thrive. They can thrive the best to their ability. One more last program, we have 2 more, is our Inclusive Early Learning Center. So that is where we provide early childhood education. And that note I want to mention is our inclusive aspect. So we serve kiddos that, the kiddos in our Inclusive Early Learning Center from birth to around 5, they have a diagnosis most often, and the goal behind that is to educate kiddos with and without disabilities together, and that is an inclusion model, because we believe very, very much so that children, the earlier that you expose children to other experiences, they value that, and it helps to eventually reduce stigma, and so we will talk about that later. And then our last program is our Community Resource Center. And that's where I started my journey at PDN. And that program has a really special place in my heart, because a lot of what the work that is done there is to educate families about disability, help moms, abuelas, tías, everybody that's involved in that child's ecosystem know about the disability to best support that child. And so a lot of work that's done in the CRC is connecting families to resources. We provide professional development for professionals, but also education for parents and families. And it's all kind of brought together into all the programs that we provide as a whole at PDN.
It sounds almost like a one-stop shop, right? That
Yes.
and that's great, because one of the things you want to do is not only bring awareness to the issue, in this case, potentially the disability, right? Bring awareness, even preventative, right? That you provide families who maybe in gestation, the family has already been told that there might be a possibility that a child might be born with something, right? And so we provide, or in this case, you all would maybe potentially provide information to prepare the family and maybe start getting them thinking about potential services. And then once the child is born, again, early intervention, right? Getting that information and getting them to the places that they need to better the child's quality of life, right? And the family as a whole to come together and really create a supportive network for them. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yes, I really, our agency, a lot of times, I wish it wasn't true that we were the best kept secret in El Paso. I want everybody to know about our agency. But a lot of times when we encounter families, it's when they have received a diagnosis or they're suspecting that their child needs some form of additional support, right? The child's 2 and they have questions. My child's not talking yet. Okay, how can we, do a screening? How can we assess for a potential need for that child to get some extra support? And all of it is based around empowering the family to seek the services, empowering them to understand the disability is not, a disability is just another aspect of life. Disability is a natural part of life. Some people are born with disabilities, some people acquire them. It's very natural. 1 in 6 children are diagnosed with a developmental disability. 1 in 36, now the most recent CDC data for autism, 1 in 36 kiddos have autism. And so as a society, we need to understand that disability is a normal part of existence in life, and our role as an agency is to empower families and support them so that with the disability that a child has, they can live their best life with their disability and have the access to services that can support them to their fulfillment.
Definitely. And you mentioned the stats, and I always bring that up even to my students, right, when we have our conversation about autism and ADHD and such. And I tell them there's sometimes statistics can be twofold sometimes, right? And so I don't want to put you on the spot, but at some point or another, we had seen autism being 1 in 166, right? 1 in every 166, 1 in 96, 1 in 56, and the number has steadily kind of, well, I know it looks decreasing, but increased, right? That the ratio of number of kiddos who are diagnosed with autism has actually increased, even though that number, but in the statistic world, the ratio is just getting smaller. But what would you attribute to that? Would it be that because we are getting better at the diagnosing, we are getting better at understanding autism as a whole, or is there something else that you might attribute that number, again, the number of incidents of autism increasing?
I love to research and look at articles and different publications around this area, especially because if this is the area that I'm working in, I want to at least be able to give some good validated information. Right. And what I'm seeing is there's a lot of different indicators in the area. So autism, there's environmental factors that can be just the awareness that there is now. Before, there wasn't a huge awareness of disability, period, but for autism. And so it's you can attribute it to the fact that there's an awareness now that more providers are looking out for it, more parents are knowing what to look out for. I think we have a generation of adults that are coming into their adulthood, and they're learning more about autism, and they're starting to see some things where maybe they could have been supported, they could have been diagnosed. So I think it's a combination. People will say that there are environmental factors too in everything. I don't think that environment can't be ruled out, because there's so many things that impact our development. From when a woman gets pregnant with a child to when the child is born. We know that there's genetics related to it. So there's, and I've had this journey even in my own life, but I see this with a lot of the parents that we serve and the families we serve, where they come and they're seeking services for their child, and their child is on the spectrum, and then they come to realize that I have autism too, and so and we know that autism is genetic, and so more than likely it'll happen where if your child is diagnosed, you or your spouse could possibly have that diagnosis too. There's a lot of factors. I think really it is a huge awareness. There was not a lot of research and data back then when those numbers were 1 in 166. To now where there's so much research. There's still gaps, so I think there's more research that's done on boys and white males, and so there's not a lot of research done on girls, and that is a big barrier for girls to access an autism diagnosis, because autism looks different with girls. So we do see there's a prevalence of males that are diagnosed. And so I definitely would say it's a mixture of awareness now, public awareness, provider awareness, parental awareness, and then environmental factors that do come into play from that. But I think more than anything, it's the awareness. We know now. Before, you don't know what you don't know. And you can't diagnose something that's never even been on your radar. And so now we know better, and we're doing better. And by doing better, we're diagnosing kiddos earlier, and we're giving them the interventions, that passport to services that they need that comes with that diagnosis. So definitely.
Interesting. Yeah, and thank you for that, because I feel that sometimes we see the statistics, right? We see the number, and what do we make from that? Right, and so it's. I appreciate you, and again, sorry to put you in the hot spot, but definitely it helps us understand the number much more than, well, the statistics say 1 in 33, 1 in 32. Well, let's try and put some more context to that, right? You also mentioned awareness being one of the potential reasons for this, and could potentially stigma, and especially, well, I don't want to say especially, but potentially even in our community, right? We are a predominantly Hispanic community, and let's be honest, we don't like going to the doctor, we don't like saying we're going to go to a psychiatrist or mental health, and that's almost taboo sometimes, right? So could it also be that, let's just say, people are afraid of getting that diagnosis, or simply that people don't know what to do with that diagnosis?
I think it's a combination. Anecdotally, I've been at PDN for 6 years. I've heard a lot of stories from a lot of families in that time. Recently, we were talking to a partner of ours, Dr. Sandra Magaña at UT Austin, and she does a lot of research in help-seeking behaviors in Latino communities. And some of the findings that she was sharing were kind of the antithesis of what most of us come to expect of the stigma, right? Like, Latinos aren't gonna seek those services because of the stigma, right? Where you hear the tío or the abuelita say, nomás necesita una buena nalgada, or, and so those kind of things that make parents, maybe a parent might have a question, but they have the family around them saying, that kid is just spoiled, or that kid just needs some discipline. Where really it's a sensory thing that's happening, or something going on with the kiddo. And so I do think that there is still a lot of stigma. I think that our community, not just our community, but the society has come a long way to show representation. So we've seen representation of autism in movies, in shows. We've seen representation of physical disabilities, kiddos in wheelchairs that are on shows or in ads. Or there's Target ads and stuff where they have like a kiddo in a wheelchair, and it's showing this different experience that we weren't exposed to when we were young, and now our kiddos are exposed to it. And I think that representation does a lot to reduce stigma, because we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of something that we've never been exposed to. And so that's where a lot of outreach comes in. At PDN, at PDN Children's, we have a huge component of outreach, because we know part of the work, half of the work, is to build awareness with families.
Definitely.
To build rapport, to build a relationship with families to the point where they then want to seek that service. And that's almost half of the work.
Right.
It's still not easy to get the diagnosis and to initiate services, and we can talk about that, but half of the battle is to get families comfortable and to the space where they will seek those services, and a lot of that is just engaging them in the conversations. I did bring some things with me today that I did want to show. And this is what I mean when I'm talking about representation in media, in society. So these dolls, this is the from the National Down Syndrome Society. They created a Barbie doll that has Down syndrome. And I never saw any of this growing up.
Most definitely not.
And this little cutie right here is a little girl, a wheelchair user. And these are toys that I, as a parent, I want my child to be exposed to. If I'm buying my little girl dolls, I want her to have access to a diversity. And then this book is a book about the main protagonist. This little girl has cerebral palsy. And the book tells the story about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is one of the major landmark laws that gave people with disabilities fundamental human rights to not be discriminated against based on their disability, and to have access to buildings, access to services. And so these things, I don't feel like we saw this when we were growing up. And so now these things are available, and on society, on the aspect, if you're a parent and you don't have a child with a disability, you can easily be the one purchasing these things and talking about it with your kids, so that they're not afraid, they're not having those looks of like, oh, what's going on. And if you're a parent that has a child with a disability, how beautiful to have a daughter who uses a wheelchair, and to be able to buy her a Barbie that is using a wheelchair just like her.
Representative of the child.
Yeah, and that's one of the basic things for all of us. For any human experience, the basic thing that we want is to see ourselves in the space that maybe we hope to be in someday, or see ourselves reflected back to us in TV, in advertising, in life. And so this is one way where I think as society, we really have made huge steps in confronting stigma related to disability. And, we still have a long way to go. But I think that these are the tools that are available to us to help reduce that. So,
and this is great, right? Because I recall, I don't recall having any of these toys or that type of representation growing up, right, as well. I'm not going to say anything about age, but I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, right? Born 84, best year. But definitely we didn't have this type of representation. So how would you counter people's arguments that say, well, this is actually putting a negative light, right? That is, it's potentially using marketing, it's a marketing ploy for companies that are putting these type of materials out?
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not a marketing genius. Right. That's why I went into social work, because I'm all about people and their self-fulfillment. At the end of the day, whatever the motivation is on the business end, the result is that a kid or anybody can see themselves staring right back at them. You know, I recently there was a video of a little girl that was shared that she was at a store at the toy aisle, and she was pointing up at a Barbie with a wheelchair. And I think that Barbie also had a service animal with, and the little girl was just like, that's like what I have. That's like who I am.
Right.
And so, I mean, at the end of the day, again, there's motivations for why a lot of people do everything.
Right.
But if it can be the outcome where somebody on the other end feels seen, feels like their existence is validated, and there's a lot to say about child development and seeing yourself reflected back to you in your growing up and your existence.
Right. That
the direction is going that way. Now I've seen cartoons, children's shows, where there's an ASL interpreter. They're, interpreting the cartoon on screen. And again, what does it do other than to just open our eyes to an experience that's different from our own for us? And then it validates the kiddo who is actually an ASL, who is deaf and uses ASL. So again, for the non-disabled folks like me, we're exposed to something that can only just broaden our appreciation and our empathy. And for kiddos and adults that have the disability, they feel represented, they feel seen, and that means more to me in the work that I do than whatever the motives are.
Right. No, and I appreciate the candor in this. Let me finish with this last question, at least for this episode or for this segment. But do you feel that this also makes it easier for parents to bring up the topic to their children, regardless of whether the child in question has a disability or doesn't have a disability?
I think so, and I think what it does more is that the kids will ask the questions, right? Because the kids are so honest.
Right. Yeah.
And I remember when I worked in the schools, and when I worked with students with disabilities, one of the little girls I worked with, she was a wheelchair user, and so I would accompany her to classes and be walking down the halls with her, and I pushed her wheelchair for her. And I had kindergartners come up to me, and it's this natural curiosity, right? It's not something that they necessarily learned. It's a natural question that I would get a lot was, "What's wrong with her, miss?" And I'd be like, oh, hi. I was like, "Oh, honey, there's nothing wrong with her. She just uses a wheelchair to get around. Just like you use your legs to get around, she uses a wheelchair." Or she uses, we had a kiddo that uses a communication device. She didn't speak. She doesn't use her voice to communicate. She uses this, and she'll tell you what she needs. And so talking to kiddos, but that was a kindergartner, right? And so we know that it's kind of an inherent curiosity for us to ask. So then you reframe it. And so I think that is one of the biggest parts of it is now that we see a lot of this representation, kids will see, they'll question, and then maybe we can reframe it, where it's not kind of like, what's wrong with her? Like, no, she uses a wheelchair. Right. She uses a cane because she's blind. She uses a cane to get around and guide her direction. She uses ASL to communicate. And so exposing kids to that diversity, exposing parents now, because we have a whole generation that we were not exposed to this unless you took the time to really investigate and learn about the population. And so I think it does a back and forth thing. Kids start asking, and then the parent is like, well, I want to answer them right. Maybe I should also do a little Google investigation to how I can talk to my kid about disability.
And I think like you said, I think it comes back full circle, right? About the awareness, not just about the parents who ought to, or that the kiddos that should have the services, being aware of what services are available, but then also making it that if these questions do come up because of materials like this, because of products like this, that now the parent maybe feels comfortable, maybe feels compelled, like you said, that now they have to answer these questions, right? So again, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for being with us today. I know this is a topic that we can go on forever and ever and talk about this. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for letting us into your home, into your computer, wherever you might be watching this, and remind you that you can catch this episode and any other episode of not just Keeping It Social, but the rest of the programming brought to you by EPCC TV by going to the EPCC TV YouTube channel. If you have any suggestions, any comments, concerns about the programming and the shows that are brought to you through Keeping It Social, please feel free to contact me at CSALAS, that's C Salas, the number 6, the number 9, at epcc.edu. And I'd love to field any suggestions and any comments about any of the shows that are here with us. At the end of the day, remember, we're about bringing awareness, just like we talked about today, and bringing to light some of the issues that face our community. But just remember, we want to keep it social. Thank you.